Okay, now my favorite part. We're going to hit Maisey Yates' The Last Christmas Cowboy book, and it's a great book. I've got it marked where we're going to stop. So let's start, though, before we stop, right? If I skip a little bit or I get befumbled, I'm not used to reading some of the juicy parts, if you will. So I will do my best, and if it gets to that point, you'll probably see me go, okay then, and skip over it. I didn't mark very well the pages that I meant to mark, but we're starting at page 35. I'm really glad that you agreed to come out tonight, Rose said cheerily, parking her truck on the curb and getting out, her sister Iris following behind her. Iris's version of dressing up wasn't particularly eye-catching, not that Rose could really judge. Her version of dressing up was to put a belt with rhinestones and a clean t-shirt. But Iris wasn't. She didn't work outside. Her clothes tended to be dowdy. Rose might not fix up, but she didn't downplay her beauty. It seemed sometimes like Iris did. Tonight her brown hair was pulled up in a ponytail, and she was wearing a demure sweater with a high collar and snowflakes knitted into it. Logan was meeting them there, at least, and Ryder and Sammy had bailed. So had West and Pansy. It occurred to her, though, that it was a little bit strange in general, because, with her trying to set Iris up with Elliot, it created sort of a pairing off situation. She wished Jake or Colt was around. Her cousins could have helped diffuse the feeling, although it might be a good thing. After all, there was no temptation for her and Logan to think that there would be anything paired off. So, if Elliot thought that that was the case, all the better. It would give him the idea of what was happening a lot quicker. He was already there when they arrived, and he was wearing a collared shirt. It was plaid, but she had to give points for trying. She looked over at Iris and then back at Elliot. "I'm so glad you're here," Rose said. "This is Iris," she said. "Iris, Iris, do you know Elliot?" "I'm sure that we met," Iris said, casting Rose a glance. "Well, there's a formal meeting. I met Elliot last night, and I invited him to join us for drinks tonight." "Great," Iris said. Her sister sounded hesitant, but Rose knew that it was just her taking in a while to get warmed up, because Iris wasn't used to going out and meeting with people that weren't with family anyway. The door opened and Logan walked in. He was wearing his black t-shirt, molded tightly to his hard body, honed by hours of manual labor outside, and a black cowboy hat. She couldn't help but think that he looked better in a t-shirt than poor Elliot did in plaid. An odd feeling settled over her skin, and a strange sense of pride or something, as if her being linked to him in some way made it special that he was good looking. But she knew that women like Logan, and she got to work with him every day. It made her feel a little more smug and proud. He was special to her. She had just gotten them settled at the table when Logan approached them, and she grabbed a hold of his arm. "Let's go get beers," she said. "Iris Elliot does water filtration systems. He can tell you all about it." They began to walk quickly over to the bar. "That was mean, Rose." "It was not mean. He likes to talk about his business, and Iris will see that he's eligible." "He's boring as hell." "Now who's mean?" "Let me ask you this. Why are you so intent on setting your sister up with him and not you? If you really thought he was such a great guy, wouldn't you want to go out with him?" "Because I don't want to be set up with anyone." There was also something in her eyes that went beyond resistance. It was almost fear. "But you think the rest of us all should line up to employ your matchmaking services?" "I'm not at the age where I need intervention yet." He huffed a laugh. "Oh, okay. So we're supposed to accept this pity dating service from the young, fresh-faced?" "It's not a pity dating service, but everybody took care of me, Logan," she said, vibrating with frustration, irritated by the fact that he had to manage to use those words in implacable demeanor to scrape down a layer inside her and reach parts of her heart that she didn't particularly want to feel herself, much less perform for anyone else. "Now, I want to make sure that everyone is taken care of. I want Iris to be happy, and don't you think that it took Ryder to figure it out that he loves Sammy? Pansy never dated anybody until she met West, and I already told you I worry. I just wonder if Iris poured so much into taking care of me and to mothering me that she never had a chance to go out and be with anyone. I don't think she'd ever even been on a date." This is page 36, 37, 38. "Neither have you," he pointed out, his words a missile hitting their target directly as often they were. Well, maybe I will, and after this, after I make sure everyone is taken care of. He shook his head. You know, that's not what everybody needs to be happy. No one wants to be alone. Iris isn't alone, he said. You're not alone. I'm not alone. You know what I mean. But you just said you don't want to be matched up with anyone. Right now, she said. Okay, so you think maybe that Iris hasn't ever been with anyone because she's so busy taking care of you, and you haven't taken care of anyone. So why is that you're by yourself? She blinked. I don't have time for it. You don't have time for it. Here we are out having a beer. You could be having a beer with Elliot just as easily as Iris. They both looked back at the table where they had left the other two behind. Iris looked like she wanted to pull her eyelashes out. So great was her discomfort. Elliot didn't even seem to notice. Iris would be fine if she wasn't so wound up about the whole thing. Well, there doesn't seem to be much easy about that, he said dryly. She just needs time to warm up. Why are you meddling? I already told you, she responded. I want to make sure that everyone is taken care of. That's it. I want to give something back of what I got. Next time, make her a cake. She's better at baking than I am, and she's better at everything than I am. The only thing I've ever done for Iris is give her a potential streak of premature gray hair and teach her enduring patience. Nothing has made this clearer to me than watching my other siblings do things, have lives, which she hasn't. She had me to raise, and don't think that I'm not aware that you too, she said. He drew back. I didn't raise you. You know, but you were always there, you and Iris, Pansy and Ryder. Colt and Jake helped out too. You were all there for me, and I was just a baby. I couldn't contribute anything. Nobody would have asked you to. I know, but still. Laz Jenkins, the owner of the bar, sidled up to where they were standing. Anything I can get you? Yes, 4 beers, she said. Whatever you have on tap is good. Laz nodded in affirmation and pulled the tab on 4 beers, sitting them on the counter. On your tab? Yes, she said. Come on, she said, picking up 2 beers. Maybe we should walk slow. Why? Because I'm not in a particular hurry to get back to that. Come on, we need to help Iris feel at ease. I don't think anything is going to do that. By the time that they got to the table, Logan had plastered a smile on his face. He was obviously ready to at least pretend to be well behaved, and for that she was grateful, because knowing Logan, it could have gone either way. 38, 39, and 40. We were just talking about water filtration, Iris said. Well, Elliot said, Iris was also generously sharing her sourdough recipe with me. Oh, yes, Rose said, feeling animated now. Iris makes the absolute best sourdough bread. She's been making it for me since I was a kid. She got the recipe from our mother. Iris nodded, forcing a smile. Yes, I did. Iris can send it to you, Rose said. It's a really great recipe. She realized that he might not bake, but he did seem enthused about the subject, so that was potentially a good sign. That would be terrific, Elliot responded. They found a rhythm in the conversation, and while it was true that Elliot could never be called a sparkling conversationalist, he was serviceable enough. And in fact, in time around they got a chance to see a little bit of his humor, Iris began to warm up and bring her own sly humor to the conversation, which Rose always enjoyed. Iris wasn't flashy or animated with her humor, but she was clever. Rose had always thought that about her sister, that she was a diamond in the rough for anyone who wanted to actually get to know her. She wasn't obvious, she was understated, and so often understated to tend to get overlooked, which really was what had drawn her to Elliot for her sister in the first place. She had seen him around for years, and he seemed very nice. He didn't attract that kind of attention that Logan did, or even the way her brother Ryder did, but they were all tall and obvious in chiseled sort of ways, both of them, very clearly cowboys. Then there were her cousins Colt and Jake, rodeo cowboys who didn't just emanate that sort of rugged charm, but who also seemed to carry a layer of danger with them. Women made fools of themselves for them. But Iris was steady, and she wasn't going to go to like someone like that. No, she was well suited to someone who was like her, someone put together, someone who could manage their own life, and Rose knew it. So Logan and even Iris could doubt all they even wanted, but she did know what she was doing. She did. Who feels like dancing? Rose thought it was a little bit funny question coming from Elliot, since she wouldn't have thought that he was much of a dancer, but if he wanted to get Iris into close proximity, then that was great as far as Rose was concerned. Me, she said cheerfully. Come on, she repeated, and goading Logan and Iris. She knew that Logan was more capable of dancing when there was a woman on the dance floor he was interested in getting his hands on. She'd seen it a couple of times. She had never particularly liked it. It was just one of those things that seemed beneath him, like he was too. She didn't know. Something to behave like other men did and to be motivated by that stuff. But that was the all kind of childish thinking, and she realized that. There was part of her that still hero worshipped him. 40 and 41. 42 and 43. Because he had such a large defining figure in her life for so long. Because of the way he had cared for her. Because of the way he talked to her straight about grief and life and big hard things that a kid shouldn't have to be explaining to another kid. But they had no choice. They had each other. So yeah, she always felt a twinge of discomfort when she saw the way a woman responded to Logan and the way that he responded to them. It was uncomfortable and stranger. It even made her feel like she was standing outside a window looking at something. But the real point was that he did dance and she knew it, so he could suck it up and do it now. With a long-suffering glance, he got out of his chair, and then they all went to the dance floor, where a high-tempo country song was playing. Rose stuck near Iris as her sister reluctantly began to move. You heard the man, she said, pointing at the jukebox. You're supposed to shake it, for country girl. The music was too loud for this to be possible, but Rose could swear she heard her sister sniff. I don't shake it. Rose laughed and proceeded to dance, throwing her hands up in the air and shimmying to compensate for her sister's lack of it. Elliot, for his part, seemed to be enjoying himself immensely, and the smile that lit up his face highlighted that he was a cute guy. When the song changed and the music slowed, she found herself standing across from Elliot, and then awkwardly drawn in for a dance. She saw Logan had taken a hold of Iris, parting her so that there was no lag, which meant she was going to have to redirect and quickly, and stop looking at Elliot like he'd slapped her with a fish. She smiled. Thank you for inviting me out, he said. His eyes darted over Rose's shoulder in Iris's direction, and she took that as a very good sign. Of course, she responded. I'm really glad you came. She danced impatiently with him and for a good half of the song, and then saw her opportunity. Neither he nor Iris were particularly bold, and she just had a feeling that they were going to need a little bit of boosting. Partner swap, she said, separating off and pulling at Iris' shoulder before giving her a gentle push toward Elliot and positioning herself in front of Logan. When Logan settled his hands on her hips, an echo of something very strange shot through her body. Surprise, that's all it was. It was very weird because she had just been dancing with a man, but she became suddenly so conscious of the fact that his hold was firmer than she anticipated and his hands larger. That very same energy that he had radiated when he did things like disapprove of her felt amplified now. His body was also especially warm, which she found strange and foreign and utterly surprising. She looked up at him, his electric blue eyes connecting with hers like a lightning strike. Be careful, he said. His words were hushed. What? He likes you. He was also looking at Iris while we were dancing? Yeah, because I might have given him a mean look. Rose blinked. Well, they're dancing. Anyway, I think that I would know if a man liked me. That was 42, 43. Here comes 44 and 45. Logan's face turned to the granite, his features hardening, his jaw going tight. I don't think you would. I do, she shot back. You have to be careful, kid, he said. You're playing with people, and that could easily bite you in your butt. Something about the way his words made goosebumps raise on her arms. I will assure you that my butt will remain unbit. You can't guarantee that. I can, she whispered. Everything is going to be fine. He shifted his hand then a little bit higher on her waist, and then she suddenly became very conscious of his thumb. She didn't know why his thumb, except that she could feel it, his thumb specifically, resting precariously high on her midsection. She and Logan became physically contact fairly often, and when they did manual labor, but it was imprecise. They would bump up against each other sometimes. Sometimes he would wrap his arms around her while bracing her so that they could wrangle a stubborn calf. But this was pointed, targeted. This had an echo. She had never felt a touch that had an echo. The song ended, and he let her go with a withdrawal abrupt. She felt slightly dizzy, like she'd been in a insulated box, and suddenly she was back out in the open, all the sounds amplified, the air feeling colder. It was like her senses had been reduced for a moment, narrowed down entirely to Logan and their dance. She hadn't been entirely aware of it until it had ended. She also felt unaccountably sheepish, like somehow he taught her a lesson even though she refused to agree with him. She had no idea what the lesson was, but she was done dancing. She made her way back to the table and grabbed her beer, pulling it to the edge and taking a long sip. Elliot, Iris, and Logan stayed out on the dance floor for a while longer. Then Elliot and Iris returned and Logan stayed. Rose watched as he found a blonde with exposed skin that looked soft as a calf's ear. Rose wasn't jealous of other women. Her body was serviceable, after all. It would allow her to do her chores that she needed to get done. But women like that made her very aware of the fact that her hands were rough, that they did hard labor, and it had a hard effect on her appearance. Rose's hair was dry from the sun, even though she used sunblock, and she was often a bit wind-chafed and sunburned. She also had calluses on her palms, and she didn't think she had even radiated the kind of dewy smoothness that Logan's current dance partner did. "I better call it a night," Elliot said, "but maybe I can give you my number and you can send me that recipe," Elliot addressed to Iris for the last part. "Of course," Iris said. The two of them traded numbers, and Rose bit back a sound of triumph. She was right, and it was going to work. Logan and all his dour skepticism was wrong. He was going to lose the bet, and she was going to be able to set him up, too. She looked back at the dance floor. He was doing a decent job of setting himself up, she supposed. She still didn't like it. That was hookup stuff. That had nothing to do with real companionship. She could remember still the way that Logan had looked at when she had bandaged his hand all those years ago, and that sadness on his face and the way he tried to cover it up so that he could care for her. 44, 45, 46, and 47. He needed somebody who could shoulder that kind of burden that he carried, who could deal with that kind of grief they'd been through. It was tough to find someone who could. They had lost so much, all of them. Logan needed somebody who would be able to understand that. "And what about you? What do you need?" was in her head. She deflected that question. She didn't want to think about it. She didn't need to think about it. And she had been honest when she'd said to Logan that she wasn't in a space where she felt like she needed anyone at all. And she didn't think that it was a double standard. She was 23. She didn't need to worry about it, not yet. And anyway, there was something about thinking about it that reminded her too much of yawning void that she felt after her parents had died. She wasn't alone anyway. She had all of them in such a deep, profound way. When Elliot left, she turned to Iris. "See," she practically chirped, "I was right. He's nice." "I guess," Iris said. "What?" Iris shook her head. "It's nothing. You're right. He's nice and perfectly sensible." "That's a good thing," Rose said, suddenly feeling the first twinge of uncertainty over the whole thing, because it'd gone well, but Iris didn't seem overjoyed or giddy or anything like that, and the fact that Rose seemed more excited about it than her sister didn't seem quite right. "Isn't it?" "Of course it is," Iris said. "I mean, we all know how difficult life can be, right? Making sensible choices when it comes to the men that you date is arguably the most important thing somebody who's been through the kind of experiences we have can do. Of course, our sister is marrying an ex-convict at Christmas." "Our sister the police chief," Iris said, shaking her head. Rose found her gaze wandering back over to Logan and his mystery lady. "Yeah, I would rather not see that," Iris said, her lip curling. "Too much like watching this family member hook up." Rose pondered that, and then she decided that it must be the truth. It must be why it felt like there was a rock in her stomach. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah," affirming it, that was what it was. Definitely like if there was one watching of their cousins, or even worse, Ryder trying to get it on with a random girl. She had walked in on Ryder and Sammy making out before anyone else had known that they were together, and she had felt decently emotionally scarred by that, since Sammy felt like a sister-in-law, and it felt like a violation of everything she believed to be true about their dynamic and the family dynamic. So she imagined that she had to do with the discomfort that was experiencing at that exact moment. "Why can't we do that?" Rose asked. "Because I don't like blondes," Iris said dryly. "You know what I mean. Why do they get to do that? Why don't we?" "You don't want to," Iris said sagely. "Maybe I do," Rose said privately. The idea of approaching some random guy and dancing with him made her want to jump out of her skin, but she wasn't going to admit that now, not since she made it an issue. 46, 47, here's 48 and 49. She just never met someone who made her want to do that. He never seen someone on the other side of the crowded bar and felt enticed to cross the room to talk to them. Well, go right ahead, Iris said. I'd support you. She had to wonder if Iris had said earlier was true of her. As she sat so resolutely rooted to her chair, if there was something inside of her that made her feel a lot more cautious about all of it. To her, love felt like a precious commodity, not something vast and infinite, but a shiny gem that you might run out of. She had been so young when her parents had died, so much of what she had been shaped around that tragedy and around all the things and experience that she hadn't had since. Logan had been 16, so while she knew that he had been profoundly affected by losing his mother, he had also been a good bit of who he was by that time it had happened. Rose hadn't even begun to become who she might be. She wondered if she still hadn't. For a moment she wondered what would happen if she did walk up to one of the men on the dance floor, wrapped her arm around his neck and smiled. If she led with a bold joke, which she did with no problem doing with men she knew, of course. She didn't want to do it to be flirtatious with him, but what if she did? Except suddenly in her mind she had a clear picture of replacing that blonde in Logan's arms. She squeezed her eyes shut. Okay, she said, I don't really want to, and you can call Elliot. You're right, he's nice. I think you're the one who said that, Iris said, so you're just saying that. You're right. Rose shrugged. Life doesn't hand us wins, Iris. You have to seize the ones that you're owed. I'm not saying that you have a win, Iris said, but given that I haven't actually gone out with anybody and Rose bit her lip. Iris narrowed her eyes. You're not going to say something about how I never go out. Rose shrugged mutely. You're just trying to behave so that I don't have to defy you for the sake of it. I don't have it in me to behave, not for any reason at all. The blonde touched Logan's face and Rose turned away. I'm ready to go. Iris looked at her skeptically. Are you okay? I'm great. I'm really glad that you hit it off with Elliot. Hitting it off might be overstating it, but I am willing to give him my sourdough recipe, which isn't nothing. Good. Well, I'm glad of that. They slipped out of the bar after settling her tab with Laz and wandered down the street. They paused briefly in front of the now vacant bakery storefront. Wouldn't it be something to own a piece of this? Iris looked longingly at the building. To have a place right here on Main Street? You want to own a bakery? Iris laughed, not seriously. I'm not that much of a dreamer. No, Rose said wistfully. I don't suppose you are, and I don't suppose I am either. Iris laughed. You are a dreamer, Rose. That's why you meddle in people's business, but that's what I like about you. I have quit having those kind of dreams a long time ago, but I've found a version of reality that I like quite a bit. She squeezed her sister's arm. Iris smiled. It's a good thing, too, because nobody can keep a business going in this building, and I have no reason to believe that I would be able to do any better, so it's a good thing that I'm just so practical to ever take something on like that. Plus, I don't have the money. Rose didn't feel glad about any of that. Rose just felt sad. Sad and sorry that the life had taken her sister's ability to dream away from her. But it made her more determined to do the dreaming for her, and it made her feel even more certain of her decision to try to get Iris and Elliot together. It's not that nice anyway, she said, looking at the beautiful red brick building and lying horribly about its aesthetic appeal. Yeah, I get to bake bread and cake for you. Iris nudged Rose's shoulder with her own, and the two of them began to walk toward the truck. I know you might not believe it, Rose, but taking care of you makes me happy. For some reason, it just made Rose want to cry. 48, 59, and 48, 49, 50. There we go. Here's 51. Logan was thankful that by midday chores he had not had to put up in proximity to Rose, that damn girl. He was still fuming over last night. She was being dense as hell, and she didn't seem to think so. In fact, the little hellion was set on arguing with him, sure as shooting that she knew that when a man was attracted to her. She didn't, and if she had any damn clue what was going on through his mind, he'd have half a mind to teach her a real lesson. Right out there on the dance floor in front of God, Iris, and everybody. He wouldn't, and not until he had got through his thick skull that it was best he didn't even see her. He was out in the far north pasture, having just driven the cows from one field to the next. The ride had done him good, though not enough good. He maneuvered his horse around and looked behind him at the broad expanse of green rolling to the base of imposing mountains covered in the jagged pines and the sharp peaks rising above the treetops. He had just spent the first 16 years of his life on a modest street just off the main drag of Gold Valley. His mom was best friends with Linda Daniels, and he had spent hours here on the ranch. Ryder had taught him to ride a horse. Still, he couldn't help but wonder what might have happened in his life if he hadn't ended up living on Hope Springs Ranch. He hadn't exactly planned on growing up to become a cowboy, mostly because he didn't know what there was an option. He wouldn't have been able to figure out the steps a kid took to get his life he'd been born onto into a life on the range. Sure, he knew that Ryder's dad did it, but Ryder's father has also been the chief of police in Gold Valley, in addition to being a rancher, and his uncle had worked odd jobs at other ranches to make ends meet. That was 51. Here's 52 and 53. Ryder had managed to turn the place into a profitable full-time operation, and some of what was willingness of Logan and Rose to do the work for free for a while, but now they're all doing decently well, and it was one of those things that Logan couldn't help but one of the weird-ass things in his life was that it was difficult to sort out. He missed his mom every damn day. She had been his only parent, the only one he ever noticed. Didn't matter who the hell his biological father was, he didn't care. Jane Heath had been there, all the influence and love that he needed. She had given him everything, and losing her had been a big blow that he hadn't thought he could live through. The guilt that went along with it was a gift in some ways, because he had to keep going since she couldn't. His heart had to keep beating for her because he owed it to her, and there was no amount of time that he could put in that would ever make it right. And this time of year, when the weather got cold and people got merry, it just reminded him of every step that had gone into creating that tragedy. Of presents that had turned into curses. Losing her had shaped him, was the reason that he was sitting here now on a horse. Her loss had made him the man that he was, and he was supposed that that was the very best tribute he could offer. Even if it did make everything he did, everything he was, chafe like a son of a gun sometimes. Tragedy felt so wound up in good things in his life that he didn't know how to separate it. There you are. He turned around and saw Rose riding up on her paint, her cowgirl hat pulled down low on her head, her ponytail flying in the wind. She was wearing a battered old ranch jacket that was unzipped, revealing a scoop neck top underneath, and with every motion the horse made he could see a hint of soft pale flesh. Dern. He blamed last night. He blamed holding her in his arms, and even more, he blamed the look of confusion on her face when he shifted his hand over her waist. He had recognized what was happening, that there was a spark underneath that touch, and that if he kept going, creating that right friction, a spark could become a flame. But she didn't recognize it. A blessing. Still, it didn't do anything to ease the fire banked in his gut. Great for her that she didn't know what the hell it could become. Great for them both. I figured you know where I'd be, he said. Well, I need your help, she said. Was moving hay and something in the damn tractor blew, and I've got it taken apart, but I'm having trouble identifying the problem. If you can't fix it, I doubt I'm going to be able to figure it out. We're both probably going to have to call Dan Swift out. Yeah, probably. Still, if you could go have a look at it before we do that. And that was page 52, 53, 54, 55. Sure. Have you eaten? He hesitated. No. I brought food because I figured that it was probably the case if you're out here driving cattle. You know, you shouldn't do that by yourself. It was a pretty short move. Still, if one of them decides to break off, I know what I'm doing, he said, testier than he intended to. I didn't say you didn't, she said, dismounting her horse and reaching into one of the saddlebags in the back. She produced the sandwiches and bag of chips and soda, and when he found he couldn't be as irritated with her as he wanted to be, You going to tie her up? He indicated her mare. No, I'm going to let her graze for a minute. He shrugged his shoulders and dismounted, leaving his gelding to do the same. Rose plopped down right there in the field, as a testament of how comfortable she was in the place, not worried about cow or cow pies. This ranch would have been Rose's reality, but he did wonder if she would have decided to work here if she still had her parents. She liked to help people. Maybe she'd have gone to school, gotten into medicine or teaching. He could see her excellent in either field. She was tireless, relentless, and down good to her soul. She took all that and poured it into the ranch, but where else could she have channeled that? And he didn't need to know the answer to that. There was no point in pushing for that kind of discussion. Not now. Not when he could be shoving his sandwich down as quickly as possible and getting back to work. So, Rose said with a mouthful of sandwich, did you get lucky? Heat crept up the back of his neck like fire burning along a line of gunpowder. Excuse me? With the blonde, she said, chewing. You were very friendly with her. Are you asking me if I had Boom Boom? He asked the question baldly, making deliberate eye contact with her, and was gratified when she looked away. I guess so. She sounded a little bit ashamed, but also stubborn, and he could tell that she was in no kind of mood to back down. That was the problem with Rose, the problem and the beauty of her all at the same time. Her name was well suited to her. He had often thought the other two girls had been saddled with albatrosses when it came to their names. Iris had been born an old maiden aunt. Pansy had a name that was so opposed to who she was as a person, tough talking police chief. The name came a layer of difficulty to her life. Combine that with the fact that she was a petite woman and she tended to have trouble getting taken seriously in her chosen profession. Anyway, Rose, on the other hand. She was beautiful, even sitting there with her knees up front, her forearms resting on them as she ate her sandwich, wearing practical jeans and that top that was offering him tempting views of her skin he shouldn't be thinking about. The wind whipped up, blowing strands of her light brown hair over her face, beautiful just like her namesake. That was 54, 55, and here's 56, 57. Her lips were a pale pink that reminded him of flowers, too, and she looked like a soft velvet, but she had thorns. Often he gave thanks for those thorns because they were what made Rose resilient enough to get through hard times that life had dumped onto her. But right now they were the kind of pain in his butt, and it was the kind of her part that didn't back down, and right now he kind of wanted her to back down. He could lie to her, he could tell her that he had. It would destroy any camaraderie in the moment, and he sure wasn't why he was so certain of that, but something told him that she would be upset if he had. But he hadn't. He hadn't won that woman, not with a memory of Rose in his arms, so close to the service. He thought that it might be convenient if he could, but at that point he realized that if he was trying to put an effort toward wanting a woman, it was a lost cause. He just kept on dancing with her to keep some distance between himself and the object of his torture. He managed to deal with Rose just fine in general every so often, whipped up to the surface typically when the physical contact was involved, but he'd been coping pretty well for the last couple of years. He struggled for a while with the initial skin-crawling disgust of finding himself attracted to his best friend's younger sister, a woman he'd known since she was a child, and now it wasn't about that. The thing was, he'd been working with Rose since she was 16, and he watched her change. There was no doubt in his mind that she was a woman, tough and capable, with a clear-eye view of the world in many ways. It was the way she didn't see the world at all that concerned him. She had lost both of her parents. She had dealt with bringing calves into the world and burying them when they didn't make it. She cut herself on barbed wire, dislocated a shoulder, hefting bales of hay, and he watched her walk off, particularly nasty, literal kick in the butt from a spooked horse. He'd also damn near crawled out of his skin when she had lowered the waistband of her denim and showed him the deep purple circle left on one plump cheek the next day. She hadn't thought anything of it. He thought an awful lot of it. And it was the fact that she hesitated to show him that she shamed him down to his soul because she felt him like he was family clearly, and he did not. He also could not bring himself to lie, even if the better part of his valor would have been to lie, disappoint her, make her angry, make her contend with the fact that it made her angry. No, he said. You could have, she pointed out. Well, there she was being observant. I could have, he agreed. Why didn't you? I don't just have boom-boom whenever I feel like it, he said, continuing to speak in bold, frank terms, because he wondered at what point would she get to be uncomfortable and back down. 56, 57, 58. Why not? It was a genuine question. She looked confused for a lot of reasons. I mean, I thought you did, and Iris and I were talking about it last night. The conversation was just getting weirder. You and Iris were talking about it? How does it really seem fair that you and Jake and Ryder and Colt can have just any willy hook up, and for some reason we can't? Did anyone say that you can't? I guess not. He was ready to change the subject. Do you do it because you're lonely? What the hell? I'm genuinely curious. I do it because it feels good, he said. Okay, so why don't you do it sometimes? He wanted out of this conversation and quick, and Rose was fascinated because she had no experience. Maybe if she knew the truth, she'd shut the hell up. Sometimes it makes you more lonely, Rose. There you have it. That's the truth of it. When you're a dumb, dense guy and all the blonde blood rushes down below your belt and you can forget for a while, then you finish and then you just feel emptier than when you started. Now he wished he would have just asked her if she always wanted to be a cowgirl. It would have been a hell of a lot more inconspicuous than this. He wanted to make her uncomfortable, but when he was the one who felt exposed, Then why do you do it? Because sometimes it's worth it to feel good for a minute. Maybe I should try it. He bit back the immediate denial. He didn't know what the hell she was playing at, and because he wasn't sure, it was best to say that he just kept his opinions to himself. Nothing to say? She kept the last piece of her sandwich in her mouth, tore open her bag of chips. Do you require my opinion? No, but you usually give it anyway. All right. Fine, he said, her bright determination finally taking a hold of him right where he didn't want, because the idea of her going out and, here's my opinion. She rubbed her hands together in mock glee. Oh, goody, I can't imagine what I would have done without it. You don't know what the hell you want. You think boom boom and you think romance. She sniffed. I do not. Well, you know what you don't think? About the reality of it. About the fact that you're going to have to decide that some guy in that bar is good enough to put his hands on you. That he can touch you and see you naked. Take you back to his place or his truck or whatever. You aren't thinking about the fact that you're talking about being... But that's a little more personal. We're going to skip ahead. I like how he's gruff with her, but yet it's a little mean. This is one of those love-hate moments with Mr. Logan. Okay, let's see here. He didn't know how the hell he managed to look at her because his stomach was burning, his whole damn body was burning. Her face had turned a deep shade of red, and she clenched her hands into fists. Boom Boom isn't a fantasy. Rose, it's physical. Hands, mouth, and teeth. Teeth? He ground his own together. You're not ready for that if it shocks you. 58, 59, 60. She picked at crumbs at the bottom of her chip bag. He was sure that he must have been terrified her just a little bit. God knew he tested himself to the limit with that speech because he was tempted to answer all the questions he'd seen and raised in her eyes. I'm sorry that you're that lonely, she said. He huffed and took a bite of his sandwich. Everyone is lonely. Sometimes it's just a part of life. Not one that he wanted to talk about, and he sure as hell didn't want her pity. This wasn't supposed to be about him. Excuse me. I know, she said. I don't want you to be lonely. I don't want Iris to be lonely. It's not your responsibility. You took responsibility for me, she insisted. Why are you so worked up about this right now? I told you I was kind of just realizing how much time has passed, how much time you all invested in me. Because Iris is the last remaining single, well, other than me and other than you. You know, I caught Ryder and Sammy kissing, she said. It wasn't what he expected her to say, but then he had no idea what to expect out of all this conversation. They kiss all the time. No, I mean before anybody knew they hooked up. I'll stop you there, because I knew they hooked up the night that they did it. How? She looked slightly infuriated by that. I happened to be sitting out on the porch when Sammy came out of doing her walk of shame. Yeah, he'd been sitting out on the porch in the dark and the cold on the July night, staring at the same stars and asking why the hell he had the bad fortune to have a fixation on Rose's body. There was no answers forthcoming. Instead, Sammy had been stumbling out the door, looking rattled, her hair a wild tangle that spoke volumes about what she'd just been up to. And given that he suspected for a long time that his friend was in love with her, and it hadn't taken emotional genius to figure that out. Oh, Rose said, looking genially deflated. I thought I was the first one to know. Sorry, kid, he emphasized that word, anything to put distance between them. I told you I know about chemistry. I know about boom boom. Sorry if that bothers you. I might be a step ahead of you when it comes to this sort of thing. You're going to lose our bet, she said. You're halfway to losing our bet already. She pitched forward and nudged him with her elbow, and he drew back. She looked up at him, and he said something mean, and he immediately regretted that reflex. The whole point of not touching Rose was to avoid hurting her. Yeah, too bad I'm a sore loser. He decided to cover it by making it seem like his concern was the bet. We never established what was going to happen if you win, she said. Thought you were so confident you didn't need to make allowances for the potential of me winning. To be totally fair, I have to. So how about if I lose, then you teach me what you know about relationships, she said. He nearly choked on his damn sandwich. Relationships? All right, chemistry and stuff, the things that you seem to think that I don't understand. His chest went tight, his airway constricting, and all the blood in his body rushed down south of his belt, and just like he warned Rose, it was really hard to think when a man didn't have any blood in his brain. And currently he was struggling to form a coherent thought, struggling to remember why it was a bad idea to pull her into his arms and teach her about chemistry here and now. 60, 61, 62, 63. To explain to her exactly what it was she felt when he touched her on the waist, because he'd seen it. She'd been confused, and she looked at him like he was a stranger. She might know what that was, but he did, and in that moment she had wanted him, and wanted more of his hands on her bodies and more of his touch. And he sure as hell had wanted to follow that line of inquiry that had flashed through her eyes. Had wanted to answer all those questions that he'd seen there, questions he knew that she didn't even realize she had, but he wouldn't. He hadn't then and wouldn't now. Sure, he said with a rough voice, knowing that he wouldn't do anything of the kind, also knowing that he was not in a position to issue any denials at the moment either. Not saying that you'll like the lesson, it'll involve you admitting that you're wrong. If I lose, she said, but if I don't lose and I'm not wrong, but then who will tell you about teeth? Her cheeks went cherry again, and he knew he overstepped, but this whole day was an overstep, and it was her damn fault. He almost wanted her to win the bet. It wasn't a good idea for him to explain anything to her. Hell, eating a sandwich with her didn't even feel safe. Everything with her is thorny about right now, just like the name. Then you have yourself a deal. Great. But he didn't mean it. Nothing about this was great. But he'd lost control somewhere back there, back where he realized he didn't know. Maybe he lost it longer ago than he realized. Maybe he hadn't been doing a good job of pushing his attraction away for her and back as he imagined, because he had that feeling that his agreement now wasn't so much to placate her, but allowing him to edge closer to a dangerous territory. Rose smiled at him, and she had no idea what the hell was going on in his mind right now, but it was for the best. If he hadn't felt like a big enough idiot already, now it was even worse. It was too bad she hadn't left him out alone there with the cows. 62-63. And we'll pick up tomorrow night, hopefully, on page 65. I'll have to mark off where we're in tomorrow night for tomorrow's reading. I'm going to get some water, and then I'll try to get this computer to stay working. I won't be singing for you tonight, but I'm going to try and do two kid stories for you. So sit tight and get a blanket and warm up.